So, ladies and gentlemen, my name is Sharon Whiteman, and I'm part of the team at the Lyme Disease Association of Australia. We've been working on getting action for patients for 10 years this past November. So I'm very excited and proud and privileged to host Professor Leona Gilbert here as part of our Australian Lyme, A Global View series. Now, Professor Gilbert, she's looking at it from the science perspective, which we haven't had that perspective on this series so far. I'll just give you a little bit about her background in case you haven't had the opportunity to meet her. Dr. Leona Gilbert is Associate Professor of Cell and Molecular Biology at the University of Jalaxia, Finland, with a doctorate in biotechnology and extensive experience in bioinnovation and biobusiness. Dr. Gilbert supervises PhD, MSc, and BSc students and is very active and lecturing at both the undergraduate and graduate levels at the university. Dr. Gilbert's numerous peer-reviewed articles span a broad range of subjects reflecting her multidisciplinary background. Her work covers turning research results into translational value to enable the development of novel delivery vectors that can be used for imaging and other biotechnological tools such as diagnostic lab-on-chip platforms. In addition, Dr. Gilbert's publications also investigate how a common virus or bacterium contribute to autoimmune diseases. Concurrent research in Borrelia and human parvovirus led her to her initiation of and involvement in the EU and international projects to develop highly sensitive and specific vector-borne disease diagnostic tests. In 2016, using the breakthroughs in her research group, Gilbert established a university spin-off company called TESTED with the aim of optimizing global collaboration to improve diagnostics for tick-borne diseases. As CEO, Dr. Gilbert's vision for the company is the provision of fast, high-sensitivity diagnostic testing for tick-borne pathogens to enable timely treatment for patients. Dr. Gilbert's research initiatives into complete diagnostic platforms and clinical profiling of patients for tick-borne diseases will improve understanding of how chronic conditions may be established by infections with tick-borne pathogens. Her multidisciplinary background informs Dr. Gilbert's exceptional ability to build effective and loyal teams. She has excelled at leading collaborative efforts between microbiologists, diagnostic developers, nanoscientists, physicists, and engineers. Leona, wow, we're so privileged to have you here today. Thank you for giving us some of your morning time.
No, my pleasure.
So how did you come to be involved in this big journey of developing recognition for tick-borne diseases?
I have to say that the more and more I became interested in microbes causing chronic conditions, the more and more the literature and the focus actually focused on because every person that I talk to in the world so far, and literally so far, knows somebody is suffering from Lyme disease or knows somebody that has been affected or their family has been affected by somebody with Lyme disease. So it's a prominent problem that I saw that we need to do something about it. That's why I basically got in to give the answers to the patients why they're suffering from chronic manifestations to these microbes and other people aren't. So that kind of scientific question is driving my passion and also the passion of my research group. So,
and this is in this series of interviews we highlighted what a politicized disease, probably the most politicized disease ever known. What drives you through? And, I know in medicine for the patients live that firsthand. What about for the scientists? What drives you through that?
Well, I think what drives us through it is seeing other champions going and doing the same thing that we are. And of course, like you said, is the politics, the whole controversy surrounding our area affects the patients, the clinicians, the clinical labs, the availability politics, but it also really does affect the scientists as well. And seeing the scientists, group together to promote this ethically based, robust science is something that actually helps us deal with, these obstacles that we face, because we do face a lot of obstacles as well.
It's like being on the right side of history, isn't it?
Yes, yeah, but right side of history, but also the right side for the patients. I think that's the most important thing is that we can't ignore information, robust information, credible information. We can't ignore that, you know, the patients are suffering, you know, even the availability or the rights of these patients are suffering. We can't ignore that. And anybody that ignores that, unfortunately, shame on them, because we really have to, you know, look at the evidence, look at the science, look at the experiences these people are going through, and actually act accordingly. And this is how we're trying to do that as a company in my research group and our collaborations around the world. So.
And what do you think is the, you know, what is the solution to this politicization? What's going to make the difference?
Yeah, that's the question, isn't it? And I'm sure there are other people that have a better answer, but I think that for me as a scientist, I need to believe and demonstrate and advocate having credible, robust, unbiased science that actually can drive then the evidence and then the policies that these individuals can utilize in order to implement better strategies for the patients, or even, you know, robust treatment protocols, you know, to test for new drugs, you know, that will help Lyme disease, and better testing for, you know. So the point is, I'm hoping that the science would lead the evidence to great credible evidence than that is being used for these individuals that could make these sound decisions. And this is a lot of hope, but in order to help this, then I really advocate this unbiased, credible, robust testing in science. And that's the point. I know that throughout history, science have had many different developmental stages, but I think we're at the point in which we do have really good science in this area in tick-borne diseases, and to prove really soundly and robustly and credibly that tick-borne diseases exist, chronic manifestations of these diseases exist, and we need to use that to imply that to our policies, our treatment protocols. And I think that's the way that we can actually make it better. Not by yelling on the top of the mountain, okay? Yes, we could do that, but I think that the scientists, the advocates, you know, patients, the clinicians, clinical laboratories coming together and then yelling at the top of the mountain. I think that whole community involvement with credible and ethical behavior in everything that we do in this area is the best way that we can move the tides, in my opinion.
It's fantastic that you talk about ethical teamwork and collaboration. You know, for too long, there's been really siloed groups working at this in sort of voices that don't connect and really build the power that they could. And it's fantastic to hear you bringing countries and other groups together, you know, from treatment to research to patients to community. So testing system are an area of your expertise. You know, I was sharing with you before we started, it's not I had a hard time even working out the questions to ask you because it's so far, and it is complex for the average patient, you know, and the driving force of this series was to help patients, but we're finding that it's helping everyone. It's helping the people that are speaking, and it's informing a more broad sector of our community than I had expected. So let's talk about the ELISA. What's your perspective and opinion on the reliability of that test?
Well, I have to say that it is an antibody-based test. So unfortunately, it has all the limitations of an antibody-based test. And the limitation is that it takes 2 to 3 weeks for an individual's antibodies to show up after an infection. Okay, and also in chronic patients, we know that antibodies may not even be produced because their immune system is so suppressed. And that has been shown not only for tick-borne diseases, but other diseases. So the reliability of ELISAs is based on the whole premise that there's limitations to antibodies. But there are some good tests out there for ELISAs. And I know in the last 20 years, the performance of ELISAs, like sensitivity and specificity, has only reached 60%, okay, of the published literature that's out there. But there is now new tests out there that have increased the sensitivity and specificity to 95% sensitive and 98% with specificity. And this is really based on high number of groups of individuals being tested. And that's the point when combing through all the documentations and informations about these tests, you really have to see how the test is testing for. What is it testing for? Because ELISA's a test for Borrelia in this country may be different than ELISA's that is being tested in Canada based on just what the protein that they're using. And that obviously is a direct effect to the performance, such as sensitivity and specificity. But we have some good ELISAs out there, and I have to say that we need to kind of change that thinking, because the thinking that I hear all the time is ELISAs are unreliable, ELISAs are outdated. But there are current ELISAs that have shown really great performance. And that's just basically putting the proper proteins there and expanding the protein profile of Lyme or Borrelia and other diseases. And that's the point, that it could be so complex in understanding how the performance of ELISAs are conducted. But in the end, if we have to think about that any disease, any infectious disease deals with antibodies as their main kind of testing, or DNA as their main testing tools to test for these infectious diseases or infectious microbes. So they are reliable. It's just we need to start thinking about and scrutinize what type of the reliability these tests have. And I think that we're on the right path, and we're not the only ones that have shown or has provided a higher sensitivity and specificity. Other companies have as well. By just adding 3 different species of Borrelia has increased the sensitivity and specificity, and that's really nice. Putting the pleromorphic form of Borrelia into the test kit like we have has absolutely increased the sensitivity and specificity. And also not looking specifically at one particular antibody, but both antibodies, IgG and IgM together, holistically looking at it, has actually increased the robustness of the test kits as well. So there's to just believe that it's unreliable is not the right way to think about it. Think about it that there are existing higher performance in these ELISAs, and I can say that we are even still trying to outbeat our performance and increase the nature of our test kits based on the nature of the species that are actually in different countries as well. So there's some hope with this, and there are hope, and there are test kits on the market right now that are quite reliable.
And what's the process of getting them accepted by governments? I know there's a lot of criticism for what's expected and used in Australia, and that a negative doesn't really mean the person doesn't, the patient does not have the infection. What are your comments on that?
Okay. So there's 2 questions there. The first is, how do you get a test kit into the market? So I have to say that governments have their own standards, but luckily in Europe, the European community has pulled together and have kind of unified. So just by a declaration of conformity that your test kit is reproducibly testing correctly, you can declare that your test kit conforms to the standards of reproducibility, safety, efficacy, and so forth. But that standard is basically what all countries have, but there's then other countries that have better standards. And we decided as a company to manufacture our test kit under this ISO accreditation, so ISO 13485. This ISO 13485 is a standardized kind of regulation that we could adhere to, that could be recognized by other countries such as Canada and Australia, okay, even China, okay, all European countries recognize, and it basically conforms, and it basically means that our test kit conforms with the robust testing of stability, safety, reproducibility, robustness, okay, and it's a standard that's recognized by many countries. So bringing our test kit into Australia means that we would definitely need to get approval, of course, register the test kit there, but because it's manufactured under 13485, the declaration and the technical documents will be accepted in Australia. So this is a good thing, because we're not trying to globalize the same standard of how we manufacture and produce test kits, but we're trying to regulate it so that's one test that's produced, let's say in Finland, can be used in other countries. And that's through this ISO 13485. But we decided also, not only did we want declaration of conformity in Finland, also ISO 13485, but we wanted all our, we wanted our test kit to be independently validated by different clinical laboratories. And we have independently validated this test kit in different countries like Netherlands, Spain, Germany, USA as well. And that independence validation means really that they take the test kits and they robustly use it and they see if it's accurate, safety, specific, according to what they would expect. And I think that those three steps of credibility and robustness in how we show that our test kit is working is actually what I believe all test kits should go through. But I understand in dealing with other countries that like the UK and like some other countries, that they want even additional demand on the test kit. They want their own people to use the test kit for a while and to show the same thing. So how to get this validated, those steps are usually what I've just mentioned are the common steps, but there could be additional steps. And unfortunately, this is the gray area where the Department of Health might demand additional reliability testing or let's say credibility testing. Like Russia requires that we do technical testing in their country, and same with China with their own patient, and that makes sense. That absolutely makes sense. So there could be additional demands depending on the agreements between countries and regulation. And then your next question, I think, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
I was going to say your next question is about negative results. So if you get a negative result, does it mean that you don't have Lyme disease? And I have to say, absolutely, absolutely. We are showing even in the more and more as we increase in our patient size that are being tested with our own test, we are seeing there is a pattern of antibody profiles in certain types of patients, like a chronic patients have this type of antibody profile, dissemination patients, chronic patients have this type of antibody profile. And it's very clearly directed to the state of the immune system. And us and other scientists in the world, like in France and also in the United States, have actually seen the same similar pattern that if the patient's immune system is low, they're not going to have the capability of actually making antibodies, and therefore they're going to have always a negative result, not always up to the point in which their immune system is healthy enough to make antibodies. And there are other unique kind of antibody profiles that we're seeing as well. Like in some cases, some long-term chronic patients that have been suffering for years have, IgM titers. So the first antibody titer that's supposed to be for acute infection that are existing after 10 years. And that's interesting for us. And why is that antibody signature still present after 10, 20 years? We have seen this, IDSA scientists have seen this as well. So there's more and more evidence suggesting that there are these unique antibody profiles in tick-borne disease patients. And I'm still harping on tick-borne disease patients because it's not just Lyme patients. So it's Lyme patients that have co-infections. It's Lyme patients that are suffering from other diseases as well. Yeah. So that's why I think about the negative test.
So then I think it broke up a little bit. I didn't hear you. So a negative test doesn't mean the person doesn't have the disease, or in your opinion does?
The negative test does not mean they do not have the disease. They could absolutely have the diseases and suffering from not just Lyme disease, but other multiple diseases that have dropped their immune system. Yes.
And so what's gold standard? And, so the ELISA is antibodies and it's getting better and better and better. What other kind of testing is really important when trying to pin down what's wrong with some of these sick patients?
Yeah, well, I have to say that, of course, the Western blot is being used on the second tier. So even our country in Finland, they rely on the two-tier system where they use the ELISA first as the first testing. And if that's positive and their symptoms still, then they'll use a Western blot to confirm the second, the second tier. And if both tiers are positive, then they can give a diagnosis. So Western blots have their limitations as well. They could be very subjective. They're technical people really highly technical skilled people need to use it. And it's not really standardized in each of the labs. You could say the same kind of criticisms about other testing, like the ELISA is not standardized as well. Yes, absolutely. We could say that. Again, it's antibody-based testing, but there are other tests besides antibody-based testing. There's the ELISpot that utilizes the transformation of T lymphocytes, and that is a correlation of basically cellular immunity. So there's two types of immunity, but the point is that there's antibody-based immunity and then there's cell-based immunity. And if you can actually correlate both sides and see what's going on, you have a better picture overall of the immune state of the individual. So that's why the ELISpot on cellular immunity testing is a test that's being used in a lot of clinical labs. So it's not antibody-based per se. It's actually well, if I can say it's a chemokine based say. So anyways, it's just seeing the fitness of your cellular immunity if it's actually responding to the Borrelia antigens or the antigens that you've used in that test kit. And then there's also, of course, PCR. Okay, so polymerase chain reaction. So it's actually seeing really detecting directly the DNA that could be coming from these microbes. And why it's not a gold standard, the PCR, is because it's very hard to find Borrelia, okay, in any samples that you take. It's really hard to find it. And that's the point that there's a lot of research being done to try to improve the PCR technique for Lyme disease. I know of many different projects right now, research projects that are trying to amplify the signal or trying to concentrate the DNA from Borrelia in certain samples like synovial fluids or from blood or even from spinal fluid. And some have received some success with it, some haven't. But to put it to a larger scale that could be used as, you know, a direct testing is not there yet. But there's some promises, but we have to wait for that. And then I think there are a few indirect tests. There's one that came out of Finland 2 years ago. It's again for chemokines or cytokines from the spinal tap, and they're trying to correlate that specific cytokine to neuroborreliosis. And it's an indirect test, so I'm not sure how robust that is actually at this moment. And I say it this way because we need more testing there, and that's the point for all of these types of testing. We need to build up more examples and more patient base to give the credible, robust data that supports that these tests are for the patient, not just scientifically, but also clinically. Because if you cannot, provide diagnosis and then followed by treatment with these testing, there's no point of having a specific test. So there are some tests that are promising to come out, like point of care testing. I've been seeing these self-tests advertised for Lyme disease, okay, that you can buy over the internet. But again, if they are not credible, for one thing, meaning like if the sensitivity is so low, then how can we believe this? And why is this test out there if the sensitivity is so low? And if then the bottom line is, can you use that information of that direct test and use it to get actually a diagnosis so that you can, get treatments? And that's the whole point. We could have as million tests as we want with good sensitivity and specificity that's robust, that's credible, but if in the end, if it can't not be used, for a diagnosis to get treatment, then what's the point? And that's where we come into this whole politics about maybe the Australian Department of Health, that if they're only relying on antibody-based testing, as this gold standard, there's a lot of limitations to all these testing. And so the diagnosis of Lyme disease or tick-borne diseases, they have to include clinical picture, testing as supporting of their diagnosis, but really in the end, not just diagnosis based on one test, but maybe different types of testing, like, cellular immunity with antibodies, maybe PCR at some point. But it's a difficult task, but we can't say that only antibodies is the best way, because that's not true. As we see with patients that are not producing antibodies, it's not the best way to test these patients. And of course, we have to rely on clinicians' clinical judgment. Of course we do, okay, because they are the front liars. But we have to make sure that the clinical judgment is following a protocol that allows different aspects of to be included in their diagnosis. And it's not just two-tier system, because we know that the two-tier system is failing. So we have to, it's a transformation I can see coming. More and more clinicians are realizing that their textbook standard of what diagnosis is not the way to go to be utilized in tick-borne disease diagnosis.
It's a very rapidly moving environment, isn't it? So, what would your call to action to all governments, like not just the Australian one, in embracing innovation in testing and diagnosis for these diseases globally, and to really, they shouldn't be siloed at all, should they? They should be working together.
Shouldn't.
It's very inspiring what you said about the EU. Yeah.
Yeah, no, but that's the point. I think that the call of action would be to really bring in together, okay, an involvement in defining really what is Lyme disease or tick-borne disease. Like many governments are trying to do this, but not limited to, you have to be bitten by a tick in an endemic area to be diagnosed Lyme disease. And you have to be tested through the two-tier system that is so regulated, so defined, that it's missing huge portions of patients. So they have to, I think the call of action would be to bring the community together, the community being patients and clinicians, clinical laboratories and scientists and advocates together to define what it is, how we should be diagnosing and allowing everyone to have a voice in this paradigm, because if we want change, we have to listen to everybody and we have to work together. And I know it's difficult to say, or it's easy to say but difficult to implement, but at least step by step we can try.
Well, I know we're both Canadian born and living in different countries. And I'm really inspired by your global view, Leona. I think it's really important, and it's something that we should be calling governments and, policy makers to rise up to that, because it's such a rapidly moving environment. We do not have the time, and patients actually have a human right not to have governments and decision makers staying in the 1990s and thinking that, especially in Australia's perspective, we're not this little continent under a globe or something that's protected from the rest of the world. Everything's moving around the globe. I was speaking to John Scott, who's doing some of the bird studies, who ticks off birds. Mm-hmm. And he's just sending me paper after paper after paper. And he just says it's inconceivable that Lyme disease is not in Australia. He says, look at the evidence. So he's talking to me on the email. It's just so inspiring that there's these great minds out there. We just got to get Australia listening.
Yeah, but that's the key, isn't it? Get Australia listening, but get rest of countries listening. And what I have seen, actually, I know I talk a lot, so you have to get used to that.
Well, because it's a complex thing, and I don't want to leave people more confused with the testing, because it's, I'm not across it at all, and I find it complex. It's better that you read that. Yeah.
Yeah. No, but I think that actually looking at it, I have seen your problems in Australia are the similar problems that Finland has, and similar problems in many other countries in the world. And it's interesting because I know you have to face your battles on your own home front first, but I think actually, why don't we mix it up, and why don't we form this coalition, global one, and advocate then that could be, applied across global countries, and I think that's my goal, is to really try to help the science globally, get global messages, and bring us together to start actually having influence. Because everything that you are doing, everything that other advocacy groups are doing in Lyme disease associations or tick-borne disease associations are doing are really great. And hopefully we could even help with that. and having a global perspective, because we need it. It's similar problems that could have similar solutions, but are unique solutions maybe for their own governments. So I think that's the way we need to look at it, and that's kind of the approach I want, in helping other associations in your association, is looking at, can we have a similar solutions with very personalized kind of actions for each country. I think that's the plan that I have.
And one of the things I omitted in your introduction, actually, Leona, just apologies, is your involvement with ELADS, so International Lyme and Associated Diseases Society. Now, how important is that collaboration between practitioners and scientists in moving this message forward to basically global best practice?
Yeah, I think it's very important to be associated with those professional groups that you can rely on, you can go to for advice, you can go for support. You could, and ILADS is a very unique, well, it is the biggest, very focused professional group for Lyme and associated diseases. Okay, and I think that even IDSA in USA is not focused to only tick-borne diseases, but ILADS is, and that's why I am still a member of ILADS, because their goal is to really help the patients, and their goal is to train clinicians, okay, with better treatment protocols, better even evidence-based approaches actually in handling patients. And I think that's really nice. But I do have to say on the other side too, is that every association like ILADS, they're still evolving as well. And I think also that they have a focus of bringing evidence-based in everything that they do. And I think that could even go further and actually embracing young scientists as well, and young postdocs and young medical students, as well, in their association, and they're working on that. We've been working on that for a while now, and we're going to still try to focus on that as well, to really build it up so that it's evidence-based, coming from the scientists as well as clinicians that actually have an impact for the patient. So I think it's really important that we have these associations, and that we stay strong, despite we're constantly, or they are constantly hitting, walls against from the opposition. So, but yeah, I think they're doing a good job, and I think they need to continue doing that, and they will, and they have a goal to do that. So.
Okay, perfect. And one of the things I wanted to mention today is to welcome you as the new chair of the Lyme Disease Association's Scientific Advisory Committee. Now, we formed this committee just over a year ago, and then last year we had sort of crucial staffing problems, so I just couldn't hold all the balls in the air ultimately for me. But it's time for science to have a voice, and it's actually dire in Australia right now from a patient perspective, and from the needs to inform change and have the voice of that change to be based in science. And so thank you so much for saying yes. The rest of the committee is excited to go forward, and we'll be meeting for the first time, hopefully in the first quarter year at a virtual level. What are your thoughts on how important it is to have a voice in science to counter some of the, I mean, it's great having debates. Everybody wants to debate because that you get to the highest level of truth, but it should be open, ethical, and evidence-based, shouldn't it?
Yeah, it should. And it should be transparent. I think that people like to give their opinions, okay? And a lot of the time the opinions are conjecture, but we can't base any policies or any actions on conjecture. We need to get rid of this anecdotal concept, okay, and start actually applying our evidence to drive us forward. And I think it's very important that we implement that in this society, which I'm sure you have, and we continue implementing it, and we continue to make sure that the science is leading us forward. So.
And so, like really one of the, I guess, phenomena that are happening in Australia is that they're getting multiple papers written that reinforce sort of a bias. And then when you look back at the published science in Australia, it's all saying the same thing, but it's really just reiterating the same perspective. So what is the answer in science to start getting on top of that and exposing that professionally, like just academically?
Yeah, okay. I have to say that we as scientists need to always try to push science forward, the development for the benefit of people forward. And I never, and I know I'm seeing it already, that the pushback of scientists, you know, people, some scientists are only doing science to negate what other scientists have done. And I think that whole concept is not beneficial for the world in general, even for the field of any field of science is not beneficial. I think what we need to do is we need to be supportive. Science at this time and place could be this, and in 1 week we could show that it's being something else. But at least we have a robust, credible investigation of our scientific question on both sides, and we should let it be like that and just allow scientists to robustly test their hypothesis and let them grow and be supportive of each other. So when I start seeing that this scientist is negating this science just for the sake of it and without a robust credible testing, then I have to ignore that, because that is not what we're doing. Any science that should be published should be credibly, robustly tested, okay? And that's without biasm, and that's the whole point. It shouldn't be biased. And if you're doing something with a bias, it can't be trusted, and that's the point. There are great writers in science, and and I have to say I'm not one of them, but there are great writers and scientists, and some of them may not have the most robust way of testing their scientific question, but they have a voice and unfortunately, because they have a really great voice, their message may be conveyed a lot easier than, you know, a hard scientist that can't convey the same story. But we have to sift through that and see really what is the robustness of their message, what is the credibility of their message that they're conveying, and can we trust it? And that's the whole point, because the skills of us diffusing all that information nowadays in our time is growing, and we are used to so much information now. We just have to make sure that we're sifting to the right message, and that's the point. We need to support and maintain those right messages and form those alliances and collaborations to support those right messages.
And Leona, what do you think is the most important gaps and the best way forward for science in regards to Lyme and associated diseases in Australia and globally? What are the questions that need to be answered urgently?
I think the questions that we need to answer is why certain patients are suffering from these chronic manifestations and why others aren't. And I think we need to look at these individual cases, not just like nationally, but globally, because we will find most likely a correlation of the same types of effects or genetic profile or antibody profile or protein profile, epigenetic profile that could be coming out of these groups. But we need to look at, like I said, as a community, not just as one nation in one type of patient base. So that scientific question I know is being undertaken from lots of research groups in the States, in Europe, in Canada even, and that's really nice. We also have to really understand and look at actually why is these tick-borne diseases more prevalent now than it was, let's say, 50 years ago, or is it just that we have better identification of these tick-borne diseases, or have they been there? So what really is causing the spread of this? And because if we could find out that answer, then maybe we could have some other solutions on stopping the spread of tick-borne diseases. Could be, you know, at the tick level, could be, you know, at the host level, like for these microbes, you know, the smaller animals, what's going on with them. And so that's the whole point. We need to work with the environmentalists, with, you know, the microbiologists together to try to answer these questions. And we need to help from the mathematicians and the statisticians to help us, you know, with this real world data to make sense of seeing if we could actually foretell or develop models to foretell what was happening in the future. So I think those are the two questions right now that I think that we are working on, and our collaboration community is working on. And it's nice to see that they're working on, because there are certain trends that I have seen in the last maybe a decade of where the research is being sent, research funding is being sent to or supportive. And those questions more and more are being supported by foundations or funding groups. And that's nice to see. So it's not just about, it's not just about the quick fix, the quick answers, the quick, but it's more of the long-term answers of how we can help, with the stop the spreading of tick-borne diseases, as well as then this, why we have these chronic manifestations with tick-borne diseases.
And Leona, is there any questions that I haven't covered that you think is important in the science perspective for Australia before we talk about doctors and patients and the way forward?
I think the, what do I want to say to, to the Australian doctors or the Australian clinicians or the Department of Health, Australian Department of Health, in regards to the science? I think what they need to do, like we all need to do, is we need to look at the evidence that we have, the robust evidence, the credible evidence that we have to support that tick-borne diseases are in the area, in the nation, and that these patients are suffering from. And I think we can't ignore that robust evidence. And I keep saying robust evidence because I know that there isn't robust evidence, okay, out there to suggest that, Lyme disease is not in Australia. But there is robust evidence to suggest that it is. And that's the point. We can't ignore this robust evidence. So stop being ignorant in this area, and let's move forward so that we can help the patients. And I think that's kind of like my last message, is that there is really great evidence to global evidence to support that tick-borne diseases are spreading, and tick-borne diseases is everywhere. And we now need to work together as a community to really convince the politicians and the governments that, hey, it's everywhere, and and these are the solutions, and this is how we can help the patients.
And I think as part of the LDA Scientific Advisory Committee, that we can have a scientific voice in Australia to sort of professionally and scientifically and solidly counter some of that bias and the steps that are being recommended to go forward, and where the gaps are as far as global best practice and global knowledge base. Because so far that it seems to be progressing unchecked. And, they're able to have these, stakeholder meetings, and they go, tick, we've had that meeting, so I've done that. But as opposed to listening to the voices and including that in part of the whole decision process of the ways forward, doesn't seem to be happening. So I think, I'm really excited to be able to have you as the head of our committee so that we can start publishing actual responses that are based on evidence and to counter some of the things that are happening here.
Yeah, I'm excited too. And I'm looking forward to working with the committee and hopefully making some influences in Australia as well as other countries.
Yeah, that, ladies and gentlemen, there's a lot of global collaboration planned, and it's not going to be tomorrow or, maybe even by the end of the year, but these steps forward are the best way to help those of us who are sick now, and definitely those in the future. So Leona, thank you. What's your final, for the people that are sick now and their families, and especially, I think you would know that, we've lost 16 doctors who are doing the right thing by sick Australians, and they've either been restricted, and it's traumatic for all of them. What's your final words for those people?
I have to say there's hope, because there's a huge community that's going to support them, that are supporting them, and they're not alone. And we just need to act as a community. So there's hope.
Leona, thank you for your time today, and thank you for committing to the Lyme Disease Association and all Australians, and our doctors and our scientific community. I'm looking forward to bringing everybody together to make a difference for all. So thank you so much.
And thank you.